Capitalism names the intertwining of democracy and capital in global telecommunication networks and personal participatory communication devices. Just as industrial capitalism relied on the exploitation of labor, so does communicative capitalism rely on the exploitation of communication. In communicative capitalism, reflexivity captures creativity, sociality, resistance, and critique, enclosing them into mediated networks for the financial gain of a corporate and shareholding class. Now, once we accept that capitalism is communicative and communications are capitalist, where might we find opportunities for resistance, possibilities of breaking free? Differently put, if a central contribution of Marx's analysis of capitalism was his identification of the ways capitalism produces its own gravediggers, what elements of the present pointing beyond it does communicative capitalism identify? One answer appears in the commoning of faces, a practice that emerges out of the communicative practices of mass, social, and personal media. To explore this commoning, I developed the idea of secondary visuality as a feature of communicative capitalism. Relying on the repetition of images and circulation of photos as communicative practices, I present secondary visuality as an effect of communication that blends together speech, writing, and image into something irreducible to its components, something new. With secondary visuality, faces lose their individuating quality and become generic. Faces in common push back against the individualism of contemporary capitalism, suggesting a way that communicative capitalism is producing new possibilities for collectivity. I'm going to set the stage with 3 examples. First, my daughter Sadie. When she was 17, and she's 18 now, so she and her friends used Snapchat all the time to have conversations comprised of photos. Sadie tells me that these conversations, which were constant features of their daily lives, she says they're just pics with short captions. The pic was most often a selfie of a stupid or ugly face, like the caption would be, "Look at my fucking forehead," and receivers would respond with another ugly face and a funny retort, "You look like a Klingon." In addition to these conversations, Sadie and her friends also posted stories, stitched together photos and videos from their daily lives. Now, story 2. In the last 6 months of 2015, I posted over 100 photos of Sadie's cat Wesley on Facebook. And I posted these photos under the heading Daily Wesley, and I was copying a friend who posted pictures of his dog called Daily Coda. And in the comments section on Daily Wesley, my friends usually write captions, sometimes with hashtags, sometimes they pretend to be Wesley, sometimes they act as if they were Wesley captioning his pictures, and sometimes they talk to Wesley intimately directly. So that's the second example, Wesley. Third example, after attending a One Direction concert, that's a band, with Sadie and her cousins in the summer of 2015, I started following the band on Twitter. More interesting than any members of the band was the One Direction fandom, the hundreds of passionate fans from among the band's 26 million followers. When tweeting their reactions to various One Direction-related happenings, like the release of a track from a new album or a questionable remark from the former band member Zayn, who after he quit, or news of an award or pride nomination, the One Direction fans would use photos of the band members, Harry, Louis, Liam, and Niall, or they would use some combination of these photos to express their own feelings. So they use pictures of the band to represent themselves. For many of these fans, words alone could not capture or convey the intensity of their emotions. Although at least one fan came close when she said that she gave thanks every day for being alive at the same time as One Direction. One Direction photos communicated the feelings of One Direction fans to each other, to the world, or at least to Twitter. A happy Harry or a surprised Niall expressed the tweeter's own delight. Funny or clever tweets accumulated thousands of retweets and likes. Sometimes there might be only 3 or 4, but the effect was of immense flows of feeling streaming across the screen. All of these instances of photographically mediated communication, they're not unique, they're common, generic. My examples could apply to anyone. They point toward the constant generation and regeneration of a visual commons of circulating images. In mass, social, and personal digital communication, images supply the raised eyebrow, sidelong glance, and disgusted grimace, inseparable from face-to-face communication. Word, gesture, and image intersect, overlap, and combine. Facepalm. Visuals accompany and absorb text, just as physical gestures augment oral communication. Using photos of others to illustrate a feeling, particularly in a humorous or ironic manner, is as ubiquitous on Twitter as the hashtag. Multiple, repeatable, and generic images are less of than they are for circulation in the rich media networks of communicative capitalism. This merging of word, gesture, and image is a secondary visuality akin to the secondary orality that Walter Ong introduced, akin to the secondary orality that Walter Ong discusses. Now, he actually uses, let me try this again. So Walter Ong introduces secondary orality to describe the transmission of spoken language in a print culture. Interested in the effects of literacy on speech, Ong distinguishes between the communicative practices of societies where communication is primarily oral and those where writing is dominant. While the idea of secondary orality remained relatively unexplored at the time of his death, his characterization of orally based thought highlights attributes that feature prominently in interactions in communicative capitalism's mass, personal, and social media. So I'm going to describe this secondary orality, because that also works with communicative capitalism, and then I'm going to add in secondary visuality, okay? So with secondary orality, basic characteristics: 1, ideas are combined via addition and, rather than in a more qualified way, like although, under certain circumstances, perhaps. 2, repetition is frequent. 3, connection to a shared life world is more compelling than analytical connection to a common or to an abstract field. 4, ideas express empathy and identification or their lack. 5, ideas are positioned as poles within a field of oppositions. That's secondary orality. Ong himself mentions secondary visualism in an unpublished lecture he gave late in his life, and he links it to virtual reality as he explores the production of immediacy and distance in electronic communication. I use secondary visuality to designate the incorporation of images into mass practices of mediated social and personal communication. One might think of the slide here from face-to-face interaction to print to voice to immediate text to photo sharing to social media to personal communication conducted through words, photographs, images, and GIFs. And what's important is that one mode of communication, right, face-to-face to GIFs, one practice doesn't replace another. They overlay and combine, changing preceding forms and practices in the process. Communicative capitalism's overwhelming influx of messages, contributions, and demands on our attention forces us to respond, right, cleverly and immediately. Finding the right words to convey complicated, likely conflicting emotions is challenging, and it's hard to do it in person, it's hard to do it in writing, and it's really hard to do it in 140 characters or less. It's even harder to do it in ways that will be charming or interesting or at least not inept. Emojis and other images alleviate some of these pressures because images circulate more easily than words. They condense and displace complex, multifaceted expression. When interpretation is too hard, when making an argument takes too long, the little images are ready stand-ins. And it's not because their meaning is clear, it's because they sidestep questions of meaning. They keep up the communicative flow by preventing it from getting caught up, bogged down, or sidetracked into a preoccupation with what it means. I saw a great example on Facebook. There was this long and detailed thread of contentious comments, an elaborate debate, and then someone posted an emoji to refute another's point. And then the first person's response was, "Your emoji defeated my argument." Defeated. In communicative capitalism's intensely mediated settings, where we are constantly enjoined to respond, and when we demand this of each other, visually communicative shortcuts are godsends, useful adaptations to conditions in which detailed analyses and complex arguments are increasingly out of place. Can you hand me my water, please? Thank you. A secondary visuality, or the primacy of the image in technologically mediated mass personal communication, is a key attribute of communicative capitalism. Rather than the privilege of top-down communication, like broadcast media or advertising, rather than a means of expression confined to artists and professionals, visual communication is part of everyday communication in digital networks. With our phones and tablets, we converse with images as well as words. Our phones are only tangentially for voice communication. On our screen appendages, images and words are tactilely identical. Most of the photos we will see today are digital images within a larger communicative flow. So images merge with text, become text. Text is more than a caption, and an image is irreducible to illustration. Words and image become equivalent. One does not replace or subordinate the other. They intermix, smash, and mingle, such that neither alone can be said to be the repository of truth. Because images circulate as conversations, we find ourselves engaging in a new communicative form where the originality or uniqueness of an image is less important than its common generic qualities, the qualities that let it circulate quickly and easily, that make it contagious. Images function as visual colloquialisms, figure of speech, catchphrases, and slang, whereas the critical or philosophical discourse on photography may draw insight from analyses of specific images. Secondary visuality subsumes the specific into the generic. What matters is whether an image is repeated, whether it incites imitation, whether it can jump from one context to another. An image's circulatory capacity, its power to repeat, multiply, and acquire a kind of force, has triumphed over its meaning, whether or not that meaning is withheld, inviting interpretation, or seemingly straightforward, or a seemingly straightforward and obvious representation of an object. And I should add here that Jack Cho observes the same set of practices in Chinese social media, an impatience with the use of Chinese characters, the weaving of images and videos that all open up ambiguous meanings. Under communicative capitalism, images circulate more easily than words, and words take on the features of images, right? Like word clouds are the classic example. This new visualism is not just advertising, not just mainstream, not just branding. It characterizes one-to-one, one-to-many, few to many, many to few, and many-to-many communication. Social media and texting rely on images of all sorts, emojis, photos, videos, memes, deploying them in multiple combinations. We live montage. The digital habitats of secondary visuality encourage collectivization. The ostensibly odd or unique image becomes one among many, like 49 weird family photos from the 70s, or 23 worst celebrity plastic surgery disasters, or 10 most beautiful sunsets, or 39 Renaissance babies who can't even. Websites like BuzzFeed and other clickbait aggregators specialize in the collectivization of the weird, the rendering of what might have once been seen as singular, now as common. The singular image is isolated and alone. The images that register are the ones that share with others and that others share. Their force comes from being many. The greater the circulation, the greater the force. We know that others have seen it and shared it, right? And we know this really concretely. The number of retweets and shares is right in front of us. To be sure, the collectivization of the aggregators is a privatization, an accumulation and enclosure of images onto a platform that will attract viewers and sell ads. The privacy of unattractive photos of private people and their everyday lives in the private sphere now subsumed and replaced by the private ownership of corporate property. The collectivization that accompanies secondary visuality, that renders images as elements of speech, and that turns private moments into private property owned by another, extends to photographs of faces. In communicative capitalism, images of others are images of me. Each day, millions of tweets include text saying, "This is me," or "Then I'm like," with an accompanying photo, with an accompanying GIF of someone who is not actually them. I convey who I am by sharing a photo of someone else. My identity or sense of self is not so singular or unique that it can only stand for itself. It's interchangeable with others. Their faces and expressions convey my own. Not only do I see myself in others, I present others as myself. The face that once suggested the identity of a singular person now flows into collective expression of common feelings. So reaction GIFs work because of the affect they transmit as they move through our feeds, imitative moments in the larger heterogeneous being we experience and become. So consider celebrity shots. There's been a lot that have been going on, these celebrity reaction shots. And again, we saw the One Direction examples. The One Direction fandom loves using these, and they use the One Direction GIFs to express their own feelings. Band faces become fan faces, faces of the fandom. When fans do this, they're doing it for each other. Their likes and retweets let them see themselves seeing themselves. So they're not just kind of expressions of adoration, right? It's not like it's communicating to the ban. They're the way the many experience a collective force. Enthusiasm arises out of experience of collective imitation, because the collectivity comes into being as a collectivity by feeling amplified, feeling strengthened. And yet, our enthusiasm, right, and yet it's still controlled in platforms that do not belong to us. Our enthusiasm belongs to another, not ourselves. Sharing, repeating, makes us part of a crowd. The pleasure accrues through repetition. The counts of retweets and likes let us know we're not alone. We see with others as they see with us. On Twitter, for example, the fact of a retweet doesn't tell you where someone stands. A retweet can be for or against, subversive or supportive, sincere or ironic. It might just be look at that. A trending hashtag often indexes a division, the struggle around a term. It marks a contagious intensity, something about which people have strong feelings. Crowds, in squares and in media, are generally diverse and tumultuous. Imitation, repetition, contagion do not imply agreement. Communicative capitalism's circulating images are images without viewers. It's not that the images are unseen, although many go unshared, culled, and deleted, like so many unsaid thoughts. It's that they're not seen as separate or unique. They flow into our life montage, becoming the visual common through which we converse, the archive or inchoate lexicon of our expression. Digital images don't present themselves as objects for scrutiny and analysis, but for repetition and imitation. The less unique, the better. We don't have time to look at them. Just a quick glance, and then we'll share or scroll down. Under secondary visuality, faces are common and private, belonging to those other than their bearers. Circulating, they express the feelings of anyone. As private property, they are claimed by corporations. Just as verbal colloquialisms are expressed as commonplaces, so are repetitive visuals common faces. We should take this point to its logical extreme. Selfies are a communist form of expression. Social products appropriated by capitalism. Now, of course, the critical reflex is to dismiss selfies as yet another indication of a pervasive culture of narcissism. I disagree. The narcissism critique approaches the selfie as if it were analyzing a single photograph. It views the person in that photograph as the photograph's subject. Selfies, though, should be understood as a common form emerging out of the communicative practices of secondary visuality. Understood from within these practices, the selfie has a collective subject. The many participating in the common practice, the many imitating each other. The figure in the photo is incidental. So a selfie is a photo one makes of oneself using a mobile phone in order to share the photo on social media. It exists digitally in that weird in-between of instant and forever. It's not meant as a commemoration. It doesn't memorialize what we've done. It's a quick registration of what we're doing. On Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, Snapchat, selfies flow past, a kind of ongoing people's montage of right now. Multiple images of the same form, the selfie form, stream across our screens, a dispersed crowd like the people we pass walking along a sidewalk or in a market or mall. When we upload selfies, we're always vaguely aware that someone, when it is least opportune, may take an image out of its context and use it to our disadvantage. But we make them anyway, as part of a larger social media practice that says a selfie's not really of me, It's not about me as the subject of the photograph. It's my imitation of others and our imitation of each other. To consider the selfie as a singular image removed from the larger practice of sharing selfies is like approaching a magazine through one word in one issue. A selfie is a photo of the selfie form, the repetition of a repeated practice. Now, to try to make this counterintuitive idea of selfie communism convincing, I'm going to enlist Walter Benjamin. In his well-known essay, The Work of Art in the Age of Mechanical Reproduction, Benjamin distinguishes between the cult value of a work of art and its exhibition value. Cult value refers to the role of works of art in rituals. Works appear in temples and cathedrals, helping to generate mystery or a sense of the divine. Exhibition value involves the liberation of a work from its ritual context. Instead of being valued because of its magical role in invoking the divine, a work is valued for artistic criteria. It's produced to function as art. Benjamin notes the shift toward exhibition value involves an increase in the number of viewers of a work and an increase in a work's transportability. So frescoes in a cathedral or a stand of sacred icons can be viewed at best by only a few religious adepts or maybe the religious congregation when they congregate. In contrast, a painting or sculpture can be moved from one exhibit to another, right? In principle, becoming accessible to ever more people. And with film, exhibition value, right? The increase in accessibility and transportability increases even more. What was distant and approachable comes closer. Photography, Benjamin says, best exemplifies the change in exhibition value. Selfies exemplify a further move, a move to circulation value. Accessibility and transportability don't just increase, they become ends in themselves. That the camera is a phone tells us that images are for communicating. Reproduction becomes inseparable from production. The image posted on Facebook can be on any number of screens at the same time, whether or not it registers to anyone scrolling through. Like, I was surprised recently, I heard a museum curator discuss a large work of public art. This is in something at MIT, and it was a big work of art in Boston. And the museum curator's criteria for the success of this big piece of public art was the number of photographs that appeared of it on Instagram. For the curator, the value of the work was its degree of circulation. So now that example is not about selfies, but it illustrates my point about circulation value. Communicative capitalism subsumes communication into digital networks premised on access and immediacy. Almost any feeling, image, or thought can be shared with another, instantly added to the larger flow of feelings, images, and thoughts. Our sharing replaces one sort of privacy with another. On social media, private feelings become private property, belonging to the corporation who owns the platforms and traces of our social engagement. In a setting of ubiquitous media, we're enjoined to participate, contribute, and share. And where we enjoy participating, contributing, and sharing, the means of literary and artistic production, reproduction, and distribution have converged. The technologies we use to communicate and create push our ideas and images into networks and onto screens where they are common, yet owned by another. Yeah, I'm almost done. Yeah. There'll be like 3, but I'm almost done. Benjamin discusses photography as a technique of mechanical reproduction. Mechanical reproduction substitutes a plurality of copies for a unique existence. He continues, it detaches the reproduced object from the domain of tradition. The mechanically reproduced object can be inserted into different contexts, associated with different objects, read from the perspective of varying discursive frameworks. As an object of a process of mechanical reproduction, A work escapes its original material condition of having been made to reappear in a new setting oriented to the viewer, listener, or spectator. It no longer has a unique existence, but a plural existence, a common existence, in that the appearance of the work is shared by this place, this time, that time. In its multiple appearings, it's common to them. When images are emancipated from their exhibition value, that is, when they're made to circulate, commonality of images becomes the general milieu. The context of communication is one of a generalized visuality characterized by multiplicity, repetition, and association. Again, we live montage. And brands are just a commercial version of this. Hashtags, emojis, and selfies are the people's version. One way that we try to produce meanings in a setting where capitalism has privatized our basic social interactions and turned them into storable, mineable resource. One last thing on this Benjamin part. Now everybody usually likes to talk about his concept of the aura and how it's decayed. I'm more interested in his account of these conditions in terms of the increased significance of the masses. The masses, Benjamin explains, desire to bring things closer. They try to get hold of the object at close range via reproductions of it. The masses are inclined toward overcoming the uniqueness of every reality. This perception of the overcoming of uniqueness is marked by the sense of the universal equality of things. The presence of the many in contemporary life changes how objects appear. Reproduced in popular media, objects become commensurable like statistics. Any one is equal to any other. So my argument is extending this to talk about the face and the selfie form as also this elimination of uniqueness, this production of a general visual common, to where that even something as individual as a face circulates as an image of everyone. So selfies are common property, yet common property owned by the few.